Welcome back to another episode of StablePod, a podcast where we host conversations with the individuals who are shaping the future of decentralized systems. I'm your co-host, Juan Escovel. Today's guest is building a full-stack DAO technology that enables organizations to easily and securely govern their protocols and assets on-chain. Anthony Leutenegger is the CEO of Aragon, a tooling service provider helping DAOs reach their goals and with on-chain governance. In our conversation, we touch on why 2025 is the year of the fee switch, how Aragon's recent product launches will enable the generation of on-chain organizations, the challenges of building for DAOs, and much, much more. I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host, Gustav Ehrentoft. Gustav, what did you make of our conversation with Anthony?
Yeah, I think like Leuts, he brought up like a lot of interesting points. I think, we also talk a little bit about this in the podcast, but basically, we saw kind of like in the past that like there was like a big focus on DAO tooling, which kind of like, went away for a bit. So to kind of like, hear his perspective and thoughts and, how Aragon is now tackling the problem, in 2025, when Aragon is such an old project, but still kind of like, I think in the last maybe like couple of years have found like their footing again and kind of like pushing new ideas and new concepts forward. I think there was like some really interesting insights he had on that point. And also that, I think a lot of the tooling providers we talk with today, kind of like a lot of them agree that, DAO governance today is not the end game, right? So it's also cool to see some of these models coming up where you can be more flexible, where you can kind of like go away from, the one token, one vote formula that, has kind of like been the dominant way to do governance and, basically since inception, right? But I think today we have a lot of, learnings and takeaways that is not necessarily like the best approach.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Getting on Aragon was very important. They're like you said, are an older project. Definitely wanted to get them on to talk about what they're focused on now. I think it's very important for those interested in the more DAO governance tooling side of things. But yeah, I found our conversation very interesting. Anthony's a very opinionated person. He has a lot of good takes. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy our conversation with Anthony. Welcome to the podcast, Leuts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. A real pleasure to be here.
I think a really great place to start, of course, is a little bit about your background. Could you share your journey into joining the space and, of course, what ultimately led you to joining the Aragon team?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I originally found the space through sort of the Cosmos Polkadot ecosystem. I know, yeah, which and I still hold and stake Atom since then. And yeah, it was very interesting. I actually think that they've done a great job on marketing and bringing new market entrants into the space. And I quickly then moved to the Ethereum ecosystem. I would say quite quickly, maybe 6 months after sort of discovering Web3 through the Cosmos Polkadot ecosystem. And funny enough, I found it mainly through a project called Vocdoni, which was a subsidiary of Aragon, which worked on blockchain-based voting, but from a non-tokenized, like Web 2-ish perspective. So their goal is to get not only traditional organizations, but actually like nation states, actually voting on-chain transparently. And it really grew out of this Catalan team, which, there was a large sort of referendum that happened in Spain with Catalonia trying to separate. And this group of guys at the time, when that vote was not upheld by the Spanish government, started this protocol called VoChain, the organization Vocdoni, which means to give voice. And then basically started trying to build out this like unstoppable, incorruptible voting protocol. And at the time it was, they were doing a little bit of work in Web3. Obviously it's like built on blockchain rails. And from there, I then moved into Aragon in 2021, so 2025 now. So I'm almost at 4 years. And moved to Aragon, and then have proceeded to work at Aragon and move my way up, starting more in growth all the way to now the CEO of the new Aragon X, which is the product and development team. And obviously we just launched a product last week, and we have another one already coming out on Thursday, which I'm really excited to talk about.
Just curious, could you expand a little bit more kind of like how you landed in governance? I feel like there's quite a few people that kind of, they don't go into the space or like, I want to focus on governance, right? They kind of just land on it because something is related to what that project is working on. Yeah, could you speak a little bit more about governance and like what attracted to that, or kind of how you landed there?
For me, one of the best use cases of a blockchain is for sure voting and governance. Like it's unquestionable. Like the purpose is to create something that is extremely transparent, that is relatively incorruptible. And these are things that can be easily built and are great attributes of a blockchain, right? So you can have voting on a blockchain that is end-to-end verifiable, which is not the case in the real world, right? Like in most countries. And I think it's always best to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's not in a country that has like high levels of trust in their democracy. And notice that, okay, like when you walk into, a voting booth and you put your paper, ballot into the ballot box, that's it. You have no transparency on if that vote was actually counted as such. I mean, even in I forget what year it was during Trump's first election, 60% of the United States population believed that the actual vote was not counted properly. And that's the United States. So just imagine countries in the world who don't have that level of sophistication in terms of and how they treat their processes, their democratic processes. And so what a great use case. Like I can actually vote on chain. It can be receipt free. It can be private. Well, obviously these are challenging things that, we're all working on, and that is also end-to-end verifiable. And we can potentially root out global, scales of corruption. I mean, what an awesome use case. And so that's sort of why I worked for this project called Voctoni, and then transitioned to Aragon, which is more general, general governance, ownership, etc.
Lutz, so before diving into Aragon, currently what you guys are currently focused on and the product launches you mentioned, could you actually just quickly walk us through the history of the project and kind of how it's evolved over time? Aragon is one of those OG projects. The name has been around for quite some time, especially in the governance space. So yeah, could you just maybe give us a crash course about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Aragon's been around. I know the founders were working on it in 2016, but 2017 is more of when it formally came about. And it was very famous for a few things. One was obviously its massive ICO, 275,000 ETH, fundraised in 15 minutes. Really kicked off. Some of the initial intentions of Aragon was to sort of look at this as somewhat of a nation state, built on chain eventually. But how that started was they needed to first, build tooling to govern this. And so they started building, a permission management system, which is de facto what's used today for governance for the most part, which was allowing, X person or agent to do X action under X circumstance. And with this type of tooling, which was the original Aragon OS operating system, and this is what the likes of Lido, Decentraland, API3, Curve are still built on today, it allows for organizations to actually govern themselves, right? So that was the first major product that was launched, was this operating system for governance. We call it a permission management system. And today it's still a very, very powerful tool. Obviously, we've launched something newer since. But it's still a very powerful tool. Then they started to realize, okay, like, how do we need more things to be able to govern ourselves properly, right? The governance design space is endless. And so then came Aragon Govern and Court in roughly 2020. And this really came out of the fact that gas prices in 2020 were astronomical. They were rising so high. I do remember somebody launching a DAO for $3,000 at the time to deploy it on chain. Today, I just deployed on chain on Ethereum mainnet for $14, just as an example of gas price differences. And so voting on chain then became basically became impossible for the regular person and for most people to want to participate. So a couple different things sort of spun out of that. One is you had Snapshot and Safe came out as one option with sort of off-chain signaling leading towards like a trusted multi-sig executing or not. Another one what came out of that, another tool offering was Governor. And Governor with ERC20 vote standard, so the token standard, allowed for delegation. So in this sense, you could just delegate away your voting power and then somebody could vote on your behalf. So instead of, let's say 1,000 people voting, often you had maybe 10 people voting or maybe 5. That has grown a little bit since. And then the third is what Aragon came out with at the time, which was optimistic governance. It was basically, X token holder could put up a proposal. It would automatically pass unless somebody vetoed it. Okay, so now what happens if you wanted to veto something? Like who, adjudicates whether or not that veto should exist or not? And so Aragon launched Aragon Court at the time, very similar to Claros, which was sort of this like arbitration court system where, professionals or people onboarded as judges could uphold the veto or not, and sort of come to a resolution. So that was sort of like the product offering that led to 2020. One other interesting point, like Aragon has obviously been around for so long that like I think the first ever Ethereum grants program after Ethereum Foundation itself was Aragon. So back in 2018, Aragon helped fund Prism, right, which obviously helped Ethereum 2.0 come into existence. Snapshot itself, funny enough, Espresso, DAppNode, and Frame. So like these amazing projects came out of the Aragon Nest program, or were a part of it at least. And Aragon was a part in founding them and funding them, apologies. So yeah, so like Aragon has like an amazingly rich history, both with a lot of ups and downs, a lot of drama at times, a lot of great times of onboarding great projects as well. So it's been a roller coaster. And then heading into 2021, there was like a massive restructuring where the foundation, or so the association at the time, decided to basically end the Aragon token. It was broken. They didn't think it was possible to fix it. They decided to deprecate it. It was a very challenging time in Aragon's history. And then what spun out of it was our team. So our team has been around for about like 3 years now, 4 years, depending on who you ask. And we created an entirely new tech stack, looking back at what are the issues that we currently see in the space, which I'm happy to touch on a bit later. But that's sort of the history of Aragon, where in 2021, there was a changing of the guard. We launched an entirely new product and tech stack. We launched another one again last week. And we've just been building ever since. And I think we're hitting product market fit now. We're getting major DAOs on the stack, and it's going really, really well. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we had Stefan from Gnosis on. I personally have contributed to make a DAO since 2018, and I think like if we look, and then of course also something like Aragon now, where it's like back then a lot of these teams, they kind of like set out to solve some kind of like problem, but in that process had to build all of these kind of like small like detours. And of course so for Maker they kind of like launched the first really successful back then, but like the first functional DEX. They launched the first Oracle. We also saw Gnosis Gnosis, right? They set out to do prediction market, and they ended up launching Safe, which is another like very, very successful product, where I think both Gnosis and also Maker now Sky has kind of like especially in the last like year and a half, I think like honed in on kind of like some new innovations and a new focus. And it sounds like Aragon has gone through a little bit the same. So like what do you kind of like take away from these teams kind of like going out and solving these things, which end up becoming massively important for like the whole industry, and in some cases even like more successful than like the initial product maybe they started out building, and then kind of like going back to I think like this like more like internal product development. What do you think about like this like journey or like perspective that we see these teams go through?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because like you do see some of these juggernauts who've existed for a long time, and maybe on their like core original product visions, they didn't reach PMF, but they've spun out little things that have become infinitely more successful. Gnosis probably being one of the best cases of that, where they started in prediction markets, I think, and Futarchy, and to some degree, and now, oh my God, Safe, CowSwap, etc. Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think staying true to your mission and your vision is like one of the key things that allows you as an organization to survive in the long term. But then on a more granular level, being actually willing to pivot and move quite quickly allows you to create things that you maybe never thought you would have created based on market sentiment and where the market's at. And that's something that's really challenging. Sticking to your mission and vision long term. Many projects don't even have a proper mission or vision, especially in our industry, to be frank with you. There's some ones that are just like really great, and most of them don't. And then being able to pivot, because a lot of the concepts and ideas that have been had over time haven't come to fruition, not because they don't make sense, just because the market's not ready for them yet. Building on-chain is extremely challenging, right? First, to start off with, it's a very challenging technology to build with. It takes time. And in crypto, we don't like to have time, pretend we have time super quick. We move on to things super quickly. The narrative changes. Honestly, it could be like every 6 months to 1 year. It's complete narrative changes and shifts. And so as an organization, you have to be like, make a decision when to keep building through those and ignore them, and when to actually sort of double down into them and trying to take advantage of them. Like a great example would be Futarchy and prediction markets. My CTO, Carlos, was the co-founder of Guesser, which was one of the first prediction markets that sold to Gemini at the time. And now, he sold that years and years and years ago. And now like prediction markets are sort of in fashion, and like poly markets sort of broken through. And futarchy has been discussed several times. 2017, again in Aragon, I just bumped into an article about futarchy in Aragon being built in 2019. And all of a sudden it just takes a newer generation with, more liquidity in the system to sort of grab something and say, maybe now's the right time. And I'm not saying it is for futarchy, let's say. I still think maybe we're still a bit too early, to be frank with you, but like, it's just a great example of how these narratives may have had, they come and go because of market sentiment, not because they're bad ideas.
Leuts, if you could go back to, I know you weren't part of a lot of those teams of Aragon that you outlined before, but if you could go back and kind of give them advice or kind of guidance, and maybe that alludes to kind of maybe, giving your own self-advice in terms of like where you go from here as a team as well, because I'm sure there's parallels and kind of lessons there that you also want to kind of adapt as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were an amazing team. Like from what I'm told, they were one of the best engineering teams in Ethereum history. One of them, of course. Like that's what I hear. Like the initial, like the package manager they built is used by DAppNode today. Like it was just incredible the work they did back then. They were so ahead of their time. I mean, they were launching a chain in 2019, back when that was totally not sexy and not okay. So the one thing that I think is very different from the Aragon now and back then is they were real visionaries back then. Extremely ideologically driven, which is very different from who I am personally and our team now, which is a very pragmatic team, right? Like I'm Swiss Canadian, they were Spanish, like it's just a very different team. And so, yeah, like I always think when you head towards the extremes of anything, it becomes challenged to be successful. So if we're too pragmatic with no vision, we won't be successful. If you're too ideological and not pragmatic enough, it's hard to be successful. So like, it's hard for me to say because I wasn't on the team then. I know they were one of the best teams in the world, but like, I feel like if I could bring my pragmatism to that team at the time, maybe that would have been a great benefit. I don't know. And just like now, being a very pragmatic team, it's always great to have an injection of ideology and, vision as well, which is something that we can always use. So that would be the only advice that maybe I could give them, but who knows? Like they were such a good team back then and they were on fire. And yeah, that would be my guess, but I wasn't there. I wish I was.
Another question kind of related to that. You mentioned the rise of like off-chain voting, and again, you weren't part of those teams, so maybe you don't have too much to kind of perspective on it. But with the rise of on-chain voting and the rise of the delegation model, could you speak a little bit maybe from your perspective how you saw the Aragon team adapt to that? Because maybe there was a period in time, at least in like DAO governance history, where kind of Aragon was it, and then Snapshot made it so much easier. Then everyone kind of shifted to just do off-chain. And then people kind of forgot a little bit about Aragon for a little while, especially because you guys are the team back then was so focused on-chain, everything on-chain. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how you kind of see that.
Yeah. So I think to some degree, the industry just lost its way to new market entrants coming in and knowing that they could build something faster and easier off-chain and realize that a user experience was more accepted and willing to be used by like the general masses. Than something on chain. And so I think like if you just look around our industry, like the true DAOs, like on chain binding execution were always the old DAOs. Most of these DAOs that have built since then are not actually, like they're not trustless. The token holders don't have ownership. And so I think we've a little bit to some degree lost our way. And like that just shows you that as a product creator, you need to adapt to what your users want. And if they want something that's easy, quick, snappy, etc., then that's what they want. And you better adjust accordingly or make sure that the tooling you're building that is trustless, trust minimized, decentralized, on-chain can compete. And so that's the challenge. Like, yeah, off-chain voting is super easy to build and manage, and you can create custom censuses, and it's a great user experience. You don't have to pay to vote. Obviously, you lose the end-to-end verifiability. You lose the censorship resistance. But most people are willing to take that risk. And so you have to adjust to that until, something horrific happens and we start to, and then we start to revert and it changes. The same goes for front ends, like back in the day, Aragon always had a decentralized front end, 100% decentralized. That's super challenging to build on. It could take 5 minutes to load back in the day, like truly. And the users didn't want that. So what did we do? We went to, newer, governor-based front ends that are closed source, that are, centralized, and then you get problems like what happened with Safe recently, right? So there's trade-offs to everything. And when you centralize, you get some security risks as well. And yeah, that's, I think, why it took off. I think Aragon at the time didn't adapt and adjust to some of these off-chain and centralized solutions and lost the user experience. And nobody wants to have a poor user experience. And I think that's really one of the main reasons that happened.
I kind of have a follow-up question there, as it's more of like a product question, maybe. How do you kind of balance, and I ask this quite often to teams that are building decentralized systems, like how do you balance user feedback and like, we're also, like you mentioned, a very ideological like niche within the space of like, you guys just put out this great article, which we can touch on next, about on-chain organizations. You're saying in some form, you're pushing like this idea, like this is where we think and how we kind of see things playing out. But then maybe over here, you have other users telling you, we want actually this closed thing here. Like, how do you balance that? You know what I mean? I don't know how to formulate that question, but it's kind of, I hope you understand the question.
Yeah, it's really tough when you're building products, especially open source public goods, which is what Aragon's been for a long time. And, we are heading towards in a direction where we try and generate revenue just out of that's what we need to do as an industry, actually, is validate that what we're building can generate value and generate revenue, which is, to be frank, the only way you actually find product market fit. Like these projects that are not capable of generating revenue, that have become closed source or off chain or whatnot, like that's not product market fit. You build something that the user wants to use, but not if they're willing to pay for it. So we need to figure out a way how to do that. And so I think in terms of prioritization, it's all a balance, just like you said. And I think you need to first, and I go back to mission, vision, and values, and actually look at the values. So you set these values as a company. Like Aragon, for one, a great concept, like one thing that we value is open source. So even if we're going to try and generate revenue at some point, we're always going to stay fully open source. And so that makes it quite easy in that sense. It's not even a topic of discussion, right? Like when we build, even if it's a new product, even if it means we struggle to have a moat, we stay open source. Our competitors, a few of them have moved to having closed source, products. But it's something that, we're not going to prioritize no matter what, becoming closed source for X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter what the consumer asks for. Now, when the consumer starts to ask for certain things that give them a better user experience, I think we weigh it in a few ways. One, we look at our true target market, like who is our main customer. If we have one metric that matters, and let's say that is big, large protocol DAOs, then we start to prioritize the requests based on those DAOs because they're the ones that we're really aiming for. And if they have a particular need, you're pretty sure that another large protocol DAO will have a similar need. If you get two of those DAOs asking for that same thing and have that same need, now you're really striking, gold. You're getting really lucky because now you're getting validation that what you're building or what you want to build or what they want is what you should build. And that's great because then it's just clear. Okay, let's go add that to, to our Jira. Let's take a look at it. Let's see what sprint we can get it into, and ship that. So I think that's, one great example is our new VE gauge system, which is about token value accrual, which we'll talk about, right? That came out of building with clients. So we built that with Mode and Puffer. And we had a group chat of 30 industry experts on VE gauges, literally in one chat, all IDing together as we built this out through them. And each season that they had, each epoch that they were giving out rewards through this VE gauge system, which is their governance system, we were improving on it with the user. And then Puffer started using it, and then and then really you start to build out that product market fit.
I think I have a question to kind of where you guys are at now, right? Because I think back before it was kind of quite clear where Aragon was going. So maybe you can explain and maybe also talk a little bit more about your upcoming products now. But what is kind of the main mission for Aragon today? Well, what is it that kind of sets you apart from the competition? What is it that defines you guys as an organization? And maybe you can tie the new products you're launching into this and on how this all fits together.
Yeah. So our strategy is we're building the hyperstructure for governance, or the hyperstructure for access control, to be short. So this strategy, this hyperstructure for governance, is in short a permission management system. And what our goal is to allow and give the most efficient way for organizations to effectively govern, manage themselves, to create value, And then we're also building out a way for these organizations to distribute their value. And this is the flywheel that we're trying to create, where this value that they're creating is being distributed to those that have the most skin in the game for it to continue to create value. And you start to get this flywheel effect, which is what every project is looking for from a growth and product perspective. And that's what we're trying to empower. So organizations that can effectively govern and manage themselves to create as much value as they can and be successful, to in return, reward or distribute that that value to their token holders and to those product users and to those most aligned with the organization, to then put it back in and create this system. And this system is where we think you can build organizations that scale far faster and larger than any traditional organization you have today.
So when you say like distribute value back to the ones who's kind of like, creating it in the system, can you be like a little bit more, specific on what does this mean? Like, which user base are you targeting? Is it only around governance? Or is it also just, value accruals to the organization come in many shapes or forms? So how do you kind of like envision this?
Yeah, our goal is to create this tooling so that companies and organizations can design a system for themselves. So value could be accrued back to users. Obviously is one thing. It could be to token holders is another, which are investors. All the users, investors, etc. of an organization, employees, contributors, etc. are what make it successful, right? And creating the right incentive and putting the right incentive mechanisms in place for them to be bought in long term for the success of that company is what's going to propel it to be successful in the future. And that's something we've been sorely lacking in our industry, right? We've basically created some decent protocols and some decent companies. A few people seem to benefit greatly off of them. Sometimes we do try and experiment with ensuring that other people, users, etc., can as well. But the system seems to be sort of almost one directional in the case that all the value that's created seems to dissipate and, go down over time. And then, everybody sort of runs off to another system. And so we want organizations to be able to govern themselves, manage themselves, operate really efficiently and effectively, safely, securely. Obviously, there's over $40 billion secured on our smart contracts. And then I think the next step, which is what we're starting to reach to as an industry, is then how do we accrue, that value to something or somewhere? That could be a token, that could be to users in different methodologies. That's up to organizations to design. Aragon builds these primitives, and we allow organizations to build on top of these primitives because it's a hyperstructure to then reach their goals. And everything they build on top of our hyperstructure then can be reused as a public good by others. You don't even need to fork anymore. It can be repurposed. It can be, it's factory based. It can be installed, and we make it as easy as possible.
Leuts, if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, okay, that sounds great, but what is it actually? How do you productivize it? I guess is the question. What is it in actual practice that you've created?
Yeah. So in short, what we have is we have a protocol. And this protocol, which is a framework, is basically, as I mentioned, like an access control system or permission manager, right? And so this allows X party to do X action under X circumstance. And in traditionally what you've seen is you basically just seen organizations use their token where X token holder can put up a proposal. And this proposal can be voted on by all token holders or delegates, and then it's executed or not. And the point of this is usually to either distribute, funds or rewards or grants, and to secure a protocol upgrade, etc. So this permission management system is what Lido used, the old one, and now we have new users on it: Polygon, Puffer, Mo, Tyco, and they're governing their protocol. They're ensuring that as a stage one rollup, for example, that users feel secure in the fact that this protocol is secure, that upgrades are done securely, and that it's not going to negatively impact their funds on that chain or in that DeFi protocol. And so that's the basic form of what we have now. And then we built a UI on top. And the UI mimics the protocol. And so you can govern your organization in a multitude of different ways. So as I mentioned previously, it was a very monolithic style build, right? Basically token holders could vote on every proposal and it would execute or not. Now we've really gotten to a level of granularity. So you can govern your organization, your protocol and its assets in a really granular way. So you can start to separate proposal types. So you can say, okay, I want to govern my protocol in this methodology, and I want that to be different from the grants that I want to govern, different from the token. And so all in one UI, I can say, okay, so I'm going to set up my protocol governance like this, my grants proposals like this, and my token governance like this. And I can choose different proposal types, can have different processes, and I can even have different stakeholders in each process. So instead of saying all token holders control every single proposal type, or a multi-sig controls every single proposal type, I can have a different flow. I can say, okay, for protocol upgrade, let's be honest, there's only 10 people in our community who can read the code and the payload of what that's going to look like. So let's create a security council. They can put up the proposal. Nobody else can. But let's give token holders a veto. And if they don't veto, it'll optimistically pass and the protocol will upgrade. And we'll add a time lock with one click of the button, no code. And we'll have we'll add this time lock so people can exit if they disagree, right? If they weren't able to veto it and they want to leave. Great. So now that makes a lot of sense, right? Like we have a very efficient governance solution and system now. It's optimistic. It moves very quickly. Token holders don't have to vote on everything every single time. People who can't read the payload don't have to vote or can rely, and they can still delegate their veto, by the way. They can rely on a professional like Stable Labs to read that payload and make that decision on their behalf. But look, like that security council that does a great job at the protocol upgrade, guess what? They're not great at giving out and distributing, capital or grants. That's not what they do. They're developers. Okay, so let's have a different proposal flow for grants or, for distribution. And so by creating these different mechanisms, we actually get to a point now where we can govern organizations on chain like we might in the real world, which is like, high context people who understand what they're doing, may or may not have hard power over certain decisions. Token holders can be the king of it all if they want or not. And you can progressively decentralize, right? And so you can actually get granular and make good decisions and not also have a lot of voter apathy because people don't want to read everything or whatever reason there might be. So now we get to like a real stage where we can actually govern ourselves properly. So that was the launch last Thursday. And that's what we're really excited about. And it's all no code in the UI. So like literally Stable Labs, for example, could have a client. You could have somebody or a project you're working with, and you could go launch this in 15 minutes, no code, and customize all of what I told you could customize without requiring a developer, without paying millions of dollars. That's how much some of these DAOs cost to build in the past, millions of dollars. You can do that all for basically free in 15 minutes and not have to rely on, getting your team to build it when they should be focusing on their product.
Really cool. So just is there any examples of teams who is, either using it today or maybe like in the near future that people can kind of go check out and see, okay, what does it actually look like to interact with this system on like a practical level?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tycho and Polygon have already been using it. They were using it before we launched the generalistic UI. And so they are both using sort of a similar mechanism, but we call it a super majority multisig or a multi-threshold multisig. What this means is you can have one multisig that has different governance flows. So the multisig basically works like this. It is the only multisig that can put up a proposal to change the chain, right? Or to upgrade the protocol. And so if it gets a 7 out of 13 vote, it will go it'll execute on chain, and then it'll enter this veto period I mentioned. So it'll enter 7 days. And this is where token holders have the right to veto on chain. That's it. They're the power holders, right? In that instance, in that flow. And before it goes into a time lock. Now, the cool thing is if that multisig that originally puts out the proposal reaches a super majority, so 10 out of 13, you can customize this however you want, 13 out of 13, it will skip over the veto. So it's an emergency proposal, and it will execute automatically binding on time. And so you can move more quickly as an organization. We've actually, for Tycho, encrypted that emergency proposal flow so that only that multisig, the members of that multisig, can actually see the payload and see what's being executed for safety purposes. So like here you get to you get more granularity in how you want to govern yourself to create safety.
Very cool. And since like it is such a like an open system, right? Of course, you also mentioned that people be coming in and building all kind of like different solutions and then things on top. And of course, here in the beginning, you might maybe helping out with some of the initial ideas. But what is like if you would have like what would be like the coolest thing that you would want to see based on like your understanding today? I'm sure this is going to change as more and more stuff comes out on top of it. But if you could see like, oh, I would love to see someone do this with this new protocol, what would that be?
Yeah, for me, it's people building their, like, if I just start seeing tons of people building their own plugins, and what that means is like our protocol is basically, the reason it's different from Governor or say for other competitors is that its primitive is permissions, right? It's not token voting. It's not multi-signature account voting. Its primitive is permissions, and the Vault and Permission Manager live, here, and basically you can install plugins into it, right? And these plugins can be governance systems, for example. And once a plugin is built, it goes into the plugin repository, which we call our governance marketplace. And then anybody in the industry can use it. They can simply install it into their DAO and start running away with with a great governance system that's already being built. So somebody built a Futarchy plugin, Rage Quit plugin, this Polygon plugin is there. This Tycho plugin is there for others to simply install. No longer do you have to fork the entire code base, make adjustments and changes, get it re-audited, spend tons of money, and then be starting from scratch. So what I want to see is we want this hyperstructure to start to grow. So I'd love to see people who want to build their DAOs, bespoke DAOs, come in, build the plugin for their DAO. It goes with the governance marketplace. They audit it, and now it's audited. Check mark. Fantastic. And now guess what? It's become a public good. Anybody in the industry can start to use that governance system themselves. Without having to do anything, without spending a dime. And that's when you start to reach escape velocity, right? And that's why we call it a hyperstructure. And that's why it's different from our competitors, right? Our competitors, it's one big piece of code. It's library. And basically every new DAO that comes in has to fork it, rebuild it to their specifications. They're touching a lot more of the code base, which is not great from a security perspective. And so we've solved that here, where it's like you don't have to touch much code to make changes. You can easily uninstall and install a new plugin and change your governance over time. And so you get like a system that's obviously a lot more secure and safe, easier, cheaper, etc. So there's just a lot of benefits to using the modular Aragon OS X system that you just can't get with old DAOs. And we're seeing that now too. Like we're just seeing there's a huge fundamental shift of organizations moving away from what I call referendum-based DAOs, which are where, you vote on every single thing. Everybody votes on every single thing. We're starting to see the entire industry start to move away from that because it just isn't working.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make a comment before next week, but basically, like I think also like what you touch upon a little bit there is like going back to something you said earlier, which is we're building open source, right? So how do you create an open source system where people wouldn't just fork it, which in the end kind of like takes the system out of your hands, right? But you build something which actually is able to provide value to people over time, in an open source fashion where they don't just get everything by just forking it, because then basically they would fork that current state of the system and come with all of these complications, but instead they kind of like get just like a lot of added benefits by continuing there. So I think that's super cool. And also like, from our perspective, we truly don't believe that we have found the best way to do governance yet. We think that, it's kind of like out there somewhere in the future waiting for us. And I think this looks like a really cool step in that direction.
Yeah, and look, humans have been trying to solve good governance for thousands of years since our existence. This is not something, it's an infinite design space, and it's not something that will ever solve. Like, we'll always be trying to improve it, and that's okay. And, us as tooling providers just need to give you a system that you as experts in governance can build on top of. And that just literally doesn't exist. Like how could any poli-sci or like governance expert be given a tooling and say, great, here you go. You only get to do token weighted voting, one token, token weighted voting with delegation. Here you go. That's all you get for the rest of your life. Good luck building a good system. It's like, that's impossible. Like, we have to have a better system for people to build on top of. We've become, I think, lazy in the last couple of years and just like sort of rebuying into the same broken system over and over again and hoping for a different outcome. you see it every day with DAOs, that are dying. And so now it's time to create a new system that is more customizable, more modular. And as you said, that, and it can be forked. Anybody can fork it if they want, but there should be no benefit to forking unless they have to walk away with the system because we maybe closed it, right? At the end of the day, it's completely forkable, but you shouldn't need to fork it because there's network effects. And the only reason somebody's not going to fork a system is if they're missing out on the network effects that come with the system. And that's why having a government marketplace that's inherently built in open source into the system, all of these plugins, for example, is a system that really, you can fork it if you want, but is there a point? Probably not. The more it grows, the less likely it is to fork, the less reason there is to fork. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that sense. We just have to keep improving.
I have a two-part question here. First, for our listeners, can you clarify? You mentioned Tyco and Polygon. Can you just list some of your key partners that are powered by Aragon?
So on the new stack, Tyco, Polygon, Puffer, and Mode would be our four biggest. We have a ton of also Morpho curators using the veto mechanism for their guardians. So most of, funny enough, Morpho itself, its protocol is immutable, right? And so it doesn't actually need much governance. But the curators on it are curating and making changes. They're making decisions, governance on, the collateral or on the vaults themselves, the composition of the vaults. And when they make these changes, token holders are basically susceptible to that change and the negative aspects that might come with that change, which could lose them money. And so Morpho created this really cool system whereby the curator could add a guardian, which basically gives the depositors. There's no Aragon or StableLab token here. This is the depositors of USDC, of ETH, can actually go and veto a change and exit the system, and that's set up by the curators. So the majority of vaults on Morpho, the whole lending protocol, actually have a safety mechanism, veto mechanism on Aragon OS X itself. So we have quite a few new users. I think in total we have close to 9,000 DAOs that have launched on the protocol OS X, the newer version. Obviously, I think only about 600 have, let's say, funds in the treasury. So we have 600 with funds that are doing stuff. But the big ones are the Polygons, the Tycos, and there's a couple more that are launching in the next month or two that are A tier that I can't list today.
And the second part to that question was going to be more of a practical, okay, so you mentioned this new framework. Do these existing DAOs need to migrate? Do they need to just how does that work in practice, right? Because you mentioned, because I did see the UI, the flow, and it's mostly kind of when you're launching something new. But I'm just kind of unclear there in terms of okay, what about these big behemoth DAOs that are kind of are slow to move and they don't want to just move over? Because I know that was some type of friction, right, for adopting maybe new frameworks and stuff. So can you just clarify there?
Yeah. So there's two small things here. One is those built on OS X, but not part of the launch on Thursday. So built on the new protocol. It's 2 years old now, but the new UI for that is only as of last week. For them, it's nothing. It was a 1.3 to 1.4 upgrade, non-breaking. They literally now just click on the new UI and they're in it. Thank God. That's easy, right? The challenge is the Lidos, the Decentralands who we're working with, and we still work with, who are on the original Aragon OS. And the governor DAOs, for example. This becomes super challenging because they have built very complex bespoke governance systems, and moving those permissions, the permission of Imagine Lido, staked ETH, over to a new system is viable in the future, but is not something that can be taken lightly because 27% of ETH is staked on Lido, which are on Aragon smart contracts, right, from a governance perspective. So that could just take a lot of time. They're also on a mini-me token standard, which came before ERC20. So ERC20 votes, apologies. So you're talking about some very complex changes, which are totally doable, but need to be done super safely. And there's no rush to do them. There's a couple still large, but smaller DAOs in OS that will make the migration. And it comes with a whole plethora of problems because ERC20 votes, I think everybody would agree, is a pretty crappy standard. We've basically baked in this pretty rigid, heavy token standard that's very challenging to work with. And if you don't have it, you actually don't have on-chain governance capabilities very easily. We get DAOs coming to us all the time. They've already launched their token. They're we want on-chain governance. I'm great. And the first thing I ask, what token standard are you on? And they're like, ERC20. I'm like, did you add, votes, ERC20 votes with like the ERC165 interface? And they're like, nope. I'm like, oh boy. Okay. Like now you need to either wrap it, you need to lock it, you need to stake it, or you need to potentially use something we've built, which is like ZK proof or storage proof based voting, So it's tough, but there's always, where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm not super worried. We'll migrate everybody over eventually, but the key is their security and safety. So we take that, very seriously.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Could you maybe also speak a little bit from like your team's perspective? Like you're not just, you don't only have to worry about building the tech, of course, like that's the most important thing, right? The thing that actually solves something. And then you had to maybe deal with like the dynamics of like actually implementing it in this governance arena, right? Like, could you maybe speak a little bit about that, or maybe you're like more hands off? Maybe that's your take on that. But there is some kind of like nudge you need to give, right? These big communities to kind of actually migrate over, and there's a lot of interfacing with teams and all that stuff.
I mean, the tech's hard, but like the social dynamics are even harder. Yeah, it's super challenging. I mean, designing governance systems is in of itself difficult, and then you add the on-chain aspects and it becomes even more difficult. That's why, like, if you're building a governor DAO, like a complex one, I don't mean like an out-of-the-box one, like service providers might charge you potentially millions of dollars over several years to get these things up and running. And that was one of the reasons we built the new product, because this is completely unscalable. We'll never get the world on chain if that's the case. So we need to make it as easy as possible technologically for when you make these social decisions to then move on chain. So I think we'll find out. So we have like a lineup of very large governor-based DAOs, using obviously the front end, they're using Italia or Agora, who are asking to migrate over. And so we'll have to work with them and their teams and their delegates, if they're already live, on moving that over to build bespoke systems. And it will take some time, but like it's inevitable, I think, at this point that there's a dead end, in that type of governance. And so we want to give them something that's better. So it'll take time, but I have full confidence in our team. And there's so many great people, by the way, working in the industry, large delegates, great core teams, that may not have hard power, but that still provide support, where I think we can solve most of these problems.
So we talked a lot about kind of like, the industry and, the current DAOs we have, the DeFi protocols, the L2s, etc. Kind of like all the current players within governance, right? But I think, maybe your vision is, maybe still aligned with like the original Aragon vision, which is, as you also mentioned now, can like get the world on chain, right? So how do you see like the path for us to start getting, more traditional organizations, communities, I know there was even some talk about, nation states. How do we get them to, use a system like this? What is like your take on that?
Yeah, it's funny because I literally spoke with a Web2 company today in Switzerland it's a tech company, but they want to do their governance on chain because they went and spoke with a lawyer about their association, their foundation. Like, holy cow, like there has to be a better way. I think simply we have to offer a better experience that has value propositions that basically make it faster, easier, and cheaper to do it on chain than off chain. So we need like on-chain organizations to basically be more effective and efficient than traditional organizations. And like one superpower is tokens. Tokens in and of themselves, are a superpower. And it's a way that we can use tokens to create these like growth flywheels, for example. We can create these tokens to be securities and equity or not, right? And so I think we're getting there, but I think it's going to take time. We basically have to like show that like it is better to go build your organization on chain than to go through the traditional methodology, which is going to cost more. And which is going to be a lot slower and cumbersome, because really like most startups and smaller organizations and even large organizations, especially in tech, they actually need to move very quickly. They want to move quickly, and anything they can do to do that while still being like very safe and secure is of utmost importance. So I think we're slowly getting there. We're starting to see a lot of RWAs, more real world assets coming on chain. And so I think it's definitely catching up now. And, I always had a dream like, that we would eventually get like coffee cooperatives in Colombia or, wineries in South Africa who are, sharing assets, and managing assets together on chain. Like it just makes sense, where they can, trustlessly, actually manage these types of things together. And I think it's just going to take some time, and we do need to like get to a much safer state where like people, like normal people, can come on chain, not be worried about losing any of their funds, and securely interact with the blockchain.
I do want to shift gears just because I really want to ask this question before we do have to go. Leuts, I've noticed your team referred to 2025 as the year of the fee switch. I wanted to ask you about, from your perspective, why do you think this is the year we get it?
Yeah, very clear that there's a shift in the regulatory environment in the United States. We still have to see how that unfolds. There's some great proposals that were put up in the last few days from like A16Z. For example, Miles is very open on Twitter about like the proposal he's put forward. Gabe Shapiro's put forward one as well, which tries to create a methodology for organizations to launch tokens that are not considered securities legally and effectively. Once that's discovered, like it does seem that the direction their proposals have headed in are more like, yes, you will either have to be immutable, and ownership is the key word. You have to be immutable or have a proper decentralized ownership. So we're not talking about decision making here. We're talking about actual hard ownership over, whatever aspect, that the token, the treasury, who knows what. And what this would mean though, is that maybe we can start to accrue value back to that token. We have not done that because of, regulatory reasons in the past. Everybody's been nervous of that. And so this is the year where everybody's discussing how can we efficiently and effectively do that. And that's what our big launch on Thursday is going to be. Obviously, if you're watching this now, it's already happened, but it's a token value accrual framework. It has some newer dimensions off of what Curve built on Aragon, the VE gauge methodology, which is becoming vastly popular. Like obviously Curve started it, Aerodrome after it, Mode and Puffer now. Oh my God, I wish I could name more. I know Near are doing VE as well. It's basically like a vote escrow locker where you vote to distribute incentives and you are incentivized to do so. And this means you can start to accrue value back into this loop. Where, long-term holders who've locked for X amount of time are the ones who are participating the most, to reap the benefits of participating, and that they reap the most benefits by creating the best outcomes, right? So, and by continuing to do this, that means there's more growth, there's more success, and it creates this growth flywheel, we say, for protocols, which is super advantageous. So that's why a lot of people are dubbing this year as potentially the year of the fee switch. We luckily have like very first mover advantage in this space and tons of tokenomic experience, which we bring to the table. And that's on this Thursday, we're launching a new modularized VE locker where you can customize your settings. You can choose like a warm up period, a min lock period, a cool down period, increasing curve or flat curve. So like you can really tailor, the experience for token holders. And then gauges are how you distribute these incentives, rewards, emissions to different protocol or for whatever you want to achieve. That's to get apps on your stack, and you do it. You send that to apps. So you have your voters, vote for what apps they're going to receive, etc. So that's like the plan. That's the big launch this Thursday, and it matches perfectly with our launch last week, which is like we're going to empower you to create value, and now we're going to empower you to distribute that value, and together that's going to be what a true on-chain organization or DAO does to be successful.
Yeah, exciting stuff. I do want to call it the time, gentlemen. I had a lot more questions to ask you, Leuts, but unfortunately, we will let you go. Just a couple last minute questions for you, actually. What can people besides what you just mentioned? What else is Aragon busy working on? Maybe anything else you want to kind of slightly tease, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. One that I've been vocal about is our ZK proof-based voting system. We're working on it with Risk Zero. We got an Optimism grant for it. The TLDR is that you basically get like an off-chain voting experience, but without the negative trust assumptions, using ZK proofs, basically where we're aggregating the votes off-chain trustlessly. You can create custom censuses, etc. You get this really like rich experience, and then you're executing on chain what that is. So we're basically like sort of getting the best of both worlds. The technology, thanks to Risk Zero, is just heading in like a fantastic direction where we can do that so easily now. Whereas like in 2018, working with storage proofs was like super challenging. And so like, what might come out of that is like a great voting experience, great customization for DAOs, less trust assumptions. And once again, that fits perfectly into our like value, create value for your community and give them hard ownership, which leads to our value accrual mechanism. So super pumped. We've got a lot cooking. We've been heads down all year and looking forward to sharing more.
If I'm a DAO leader listening to this conversation, where should I go? How can I get in contact with your team?
Yeah, you can app.aragon.org if you want to just go in there and create your own DAO. You don't even need to speak to us, but or you can easily email me or DM me on Twitter. Quite easily, you'll find me there, Leuts.eth, and I'm happy to help you save millions of dollars, do this really quickly, and be successful.
Awesome. Gustav, any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, right? Because I feel like the DAO space went through this evolution in the last 4 years, where I think 4 years ago there was a lot of people who tried with DAO tooling. Most of them failed, and there was not really I think a business case for it back then. So it's super exhilarating to see you guys still being here and still pushing forward, and maybe even now doing something which might end up being bigger than anything that you've done before. So I think it's really uplifting to see that there's still this much innovation going around in the governance space, and also because we, as I mentioned earlier, we don't think we are there yet where we need to be. So we need this kind of innovation, right? So it's really great to have an amazing team like Aragon working on these kind of things.
Yeah, thank you guys so much, honestly, and for the work you guys are doing in the space as well. It's super important. We need tons of people working, especially on the social layer. So we need to work together, and looking forward to working with you guys and changing this industry for the better, and empowering founders and token holders and builders to reach their goals.
Love it. Awesome. All right, guys, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Leuts, for joining us. Thank you, Gustav, as always. We'll see everyone on the next episode of StablePod.